Hello. As you know, there are lots of theories about how learners behave and how they learn. This diagram shows us one of the ways of looking at the characteristics of your learners. For example, some of them might prefer to work as individuals. At the other end of the extreme, some of them may be far more social in their characteristics. Some will prefer to remain active, others passive. Some of their learning process will involve them receiving information. At other times they may be experiencing the learning process much more actively. This is another way really of looking at how learners learn. Some of them may be spending time thinking and reflecting. Another part of the process will involve them in conversation and interaction with other learners. They may be experiencing the learning process in some active way, but then finally they'll be needing to show that they have actually learned something. Which brings me to constructivism. There are, as I've said, very many theories of how learning actually happens, but this is a very popular theory at the moment, and I'm going to go through some of its characteristics. You can take it or leave it, but I think you might find that it is kind of in tune with the kinds of learners that we encounter, that we meet nowadays. This is the kind of way the learning process seems to be seen nowadays, that it's the learner who has the responsibility ultimately. You may feel as though the teacher has, but ultimately if the learner doesn't want to learn, the learning doesn't happen. And the learner has to be actively engaged and motivated. And this is perhaps the key element of constructivism, the idea that learning is really achieved only by sharing the learning experience with other people, by interacting, by collaborating. Learning, the constructivist idea would claim, is not an individual pursuit. Another characteristic of the constructivist point of view is that the instructor or the tutor and the learners are all equally involved in learning from each other. Gone are the days when the tutor was the font of all knowledge, filling up the empty vessel of the learner. Constructivism argues that the students need to be able to teach whatever they're learning as well, and that's a really useful way of showing that they have actually learned whatever is the goal. Assessment isn't just something tagged on at the end in constructivism. It's an integral part of the learning process. Assessment for learning rather than just assessment of learning. This is a commonly held belief that for learning to be successful, it should be challenging, but not so challenging that the learners lose heart. And the learning shouldn't be happening in in some kind of a vacuum. It should reflect the world in which the learners will be using whatever they have learned. This is a slightly more problematic idea, the idea that the learners should actually have ownership of the learning. Maybe we can discuss at another time what that really means. But the idea really is that the whole learning process can only move forward if the students, if the learners are actually solving a real problem. And although we are often told that learning is a global process nowadays, it is nevertheless also a local process. And finally, again, you might imagine that the Internet, Web 2.0 and the globalization of education might have a depersonalizing effect, but in fact the emotions and life contents, the actual lives of those involved, have to be seen as an integral part of learning. how the student feels, the emotions, the feelings, the prejudices, the ideas, all form part of the learning process. Well, that was a quick look at constructivism. There are maybe some ideas in there that you'll want to take further, but bear in mind there are other theories of learning which we can look at a different occasion.